So good morning. My name is Patricia Maguire and I am the Director of the UCD Institute for Discovery. And today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Mary Quaney, who's the CEO of Mainstream Renewable Power. So hi Mary, lovely to be here with you today in UCD. Shall we kick straight off with my first question, which is what brought you, Mary, to work in the renewable sector?
Thank you, Patricia, and a pleasure to be here. I was always interested in renewable energy, and so back in 2009, when an opportunity arose to join Mainstream, the company was just a year old at that stage. So, really I didn't hesitate. I could see the potential of the industry to take off and a company that was about to take off on that journey. And, coming from a finance background, for me personally, to be involved in building a company that would be, a profitable company that would deliver value to shareholders has really been, quite an interesting journey. And as the sector has evolved, as the company has grown over that 10 years to where we are today, where renewable energy is cost competitive, it is growing at a rapid scale. It's really a really compelling industry to be in.
Fantastic, Mary. So next question for you is, Mainstream has been in the renewables business since 2008. So maybe you can tell us how the company actually started and I suppose how it has evolved over that time.
Well, actually, Mainstream was founded, as you say, in 2008, but our corporate history goes right back to our predecessor company, Airtricity. Airtricity was also founded by Dr. Eddie O'Connor, who also founded Mainstream. Airtricity was founded in 1997 and was sold in 2008 for €1.8 billion. And Airtricity was a very successful onshore and offshore wind developer and Ireland's first green utility. So then when Mainstream was founded, we got off to quite a rapid start very quickly, and we had two key focus areas. The first being the development of onshore and offshore wind in countries that, had remarkable resources for renewable energy, but really didn't have a renewable energy sector, so very strong growth opportunities. And that's what brought us to Chile and to South Africa as an example. And then our second focus was on growing that leading position that already was there and the leading expertise in offshore wind. And so we got off to a very strong start with securing licenses to develop offshore in Scotland and England back in 2009. So then that brings us to where we are today. So a very established company with a very significant presence across Latin America, Africa and Asia Pacific. For example, in Latin America, we are the largest renewable energy developer in Chile today. We've also expanded from there into Colombia. Similarly, in South Africa, we are one of the largest renewable energy developers in the sector. And also through our Lekela joint venture, we have projects in Senegal, in Egypt and in Ghana. And then in Asia Pacific, where we have entered in recent years, we've established a very strong development pipeline in Vietnam. We've got projects in the Philippines. And our offshore credentials over the last 10 years really, stand second to none in the sector. Overall, we've developed about a quarter of all of the offshore wind farms you see operating and in construction in UK waters today, which is, of course, the largest offshore wind market in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I suppose we are starting to see a lot of renewable electricity being generated, I suppose with energy production being more reliant on the weather, for example, so wind to solar, as you say. So my question for you, Mary, is this sustainable as we add more renewables to the system?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, let me say a few words about grid and transmission. Grid operators are managing very large amounts of variable renewable energy on quite a regular basis now. So, for example, in Ireland, about 30% of our electricity mix comes from renewable energy. In the UK, that figure stands at over 40%. Okay. So the system operators in both countries are managing very large amounts of wind and solar power, really without any issue. And just to illustrate the point, just last week, the UK broke its current record for wind energy with over 17 gigawatts of wind on the system in one day. And by way of context, that's about 3 times like the total capacity of the Irish electricity sector. So, we're still some distance away from needing large amounts of additional storage in any grid systems to help with balancing, and storage certainly will play a role. But, as we've heard over today and yesterday, a far more efficient way of managing variable generation, particularly in Europe, would be to build long-distance transmission, so as to create new grid networks enabling more and more renewable energy onto the system, so that, for instance, we can exploit the extensive offshore wind capabilities that we have here in Ireland and transmission that energy for immediate dispatch onto mainland Europe. Then secondly, I'll say a few words about hybrid projects. Through our 10 years or more with Mainstream, we have very much led by innovating as our sector evolves. And one of our particular successes has been the structuring of wind and solar portfolios together, so as to combine the projects on a hybrid basis to produce firm power. So in Chile, for example, we have created a network of projects from solar in the Atacama Desert, along with wind projects in southern Chile, that enable us to compete and win in a technology neutral auction for firm power, where this combination of wind and solar successfully outcompetes on price and delivery against built coal-fired assets and against new gas-fired generation. So today we have 9, which is soon to be 10, wind and solar projects in construction in Chile that service firm power purchase agreements. And the combination of the morning, evening and nightly wind profiles, when combined with the predictable daily solar profile, provides quite a firm 24/7 power profile. And that's without any battery storage. So this combination of wind and solar projects, it's cost competitive, it significantly is reducing the cost of electricity to the consumer. And by way of context, the total capex there is about $1.8 billion, and it will provide electricity to power over 1.5 million Chilean households, or 1 in 5 Chilean households. And then thirdly, battery storage, which I've already mentioned. As the cost of large-scale batteries decreases and continues to decrease, we are, combining battery storage systems with renewable energy assets at a large scale, and these are being deployed. So, for example, in Australia, in the United States, we see these systems being built at a very, very large scale. And as costs continue to decrease, we will see more and more of that as the sector evolves.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting, Mary. So, I suppose, based on what you're saying, what do you see would be the next phase of the evolution of the energy system?
Well, we've heard a lot today and yesterday, and the message being repeated from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, of how much renewable energy needs to be built. We have to quadruple annual investment in renewables in order to meet the Paris objectives. So, looking ahead to 2050, that tells us that 90% of all electricity will be provided from renewable energy, and looking to the overall energy mix, with increasing electrification across various sectors, that electricity will increase so as to supply over 70% of the world's energy mix, either directly or by creating alternative fuels like hydrogen. And that's a huge change from where we are today, where electricity accounts for around 20% of all of our energy. So the next phase of evolution will be about building more wind and solar energy, and the next phase again will be about building even more and more wind and solar energy, and at a much greater pace than what we see today. Then secondly, alongside this, I think we will begin to see the impact of digital technology. So the use of big data in the design and operation of large fleets of renewable energy power stations. So, as we integrate more and more variable generation into our networks, our demand for that electricity will become increasingly variable and sophisticated. So, we as consumers will be incentivized to use power at certain times of the day, to charge our electric vehicles at night. The grid will send signals directly to our appliances, to run at various times. And that is very much even already happening today. The technology is there already in the UK. At least one electricity supplier sends its customer text messages so as to encourage them to take advantage of lower than average electricity pricing at various times of the day or night. And soon the system will cut the consumer out of that loop and communicate directly with our appliances.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that. So Mary, Mainstream have recently announced a new project, and that's looking at clean hydrogen and ammonia production. So what are the opportunities here with this? And I suppose, how does that fit into your future business strategy?
So earlier I referred to Chile as an example of a country that we entered due to its excellent wind and solar resources, which were largely unexploited 12 years ago. The Atacama Desert is one of the areas on the planet with the highest irradiation levels. You really can build very large amounts of solar power plant there to deliver very cheap electricity. Chile also has excellent wind resources. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Chile has the renewable energy potential to install about 70 times the electricity generation capacity that the country has today. So, this abundant resource is really ripe for Chile to become one of the cheapest places on the planet to manufacture green hydrogen, or hydrogen generated from renewable energy. Hydrogen already today is an industrial gas that's used quite widely, and it's produced from water. Water is separated into its constituent parts, being hydrogen and oxygen, using renewable energy, so therefore green hydrogen. It functions as an energy carrier. It emits no CO2 when used, so it can replace the use of fossil fuels. And the same can be said for ammonia. Ammonia is produced from hydrogen and atmospheric nitrogen. So using renewable energy to manufacture hydrogen and ammonia to get to the harder to access areas of the energy transition, as other panelists are discussing this morning. So 2 years ago, as Minister Jobet said yesterday, the government of Chile launched its hydrogen strategy. And it did so not just because of the excellent renewable energy resources that the country has, but also, because it sees the geopolitical and the economic advantages that will accrue to Chile from the development of these resources. Chile doesn't have any fossil fuel resources, so it's traditionally been an importer of its energy. But being an efficient producer of green hydrogen really turns that dynamic on its head. So we're now looking at the renewable energy superstates of the coming decades. Chile has the potential to export, to deliver the green hydrogen to markets across Asia Pacific, also for domestic use, to use that cheap electricity that it produces to decarbonise, as well as to attract new industries into the country that want large amounts of low-cost green energy. So in that landscape, it makes absolute sense for us at Mainstream to play a strong role in that, and to really deliver value by using our expertise to develop large-scale renewable energy for the production of green hydrogen.
Okay, and speaking of that hydrogen, then what would that hydrogen be used for?
So there are several use cases, and particularly the harder to access areas of the energy transition that cannot be electrified so easily. So, for example, using renewable energy to manufacture, green hydrogen to displace fossil fuels definitely has a role to play in the energy transition. So there are several use cases, both for domestic and for export. Both hydrogen and ammonia can be transported. So by way of example, the most obvious use is to replace the large amounts of hydrogen that are already produced using carbon-intensive methods. So, for example, the International Energy Agency points to 31.5 million tonnes of ammonia production in 2018. So producing that ammonia from renewable energy to produce green ammonia, which is used, for example, in fertiliser production. Also then in manufacturing, such as steel making, using green hydrogen, cement making similarly. And in transport, particularly areas that are not as suitable for electrification. For example, shipping is a good example of that. So producing that hydrogen and ammonia from the lowest cost and most efficient sources of renewable energy, as we see in Chile, really is quite compelling.
Wow, okay. So here's a question for you. What do you see as the biggest challenge in delivering on our climate ambitions over the next few years, Mary?
So we've spoken a lot, today and yesterday about political leadership and particularly the short-term thinking because, it can be very, of course, easy for politicians facing the electorate in a year or in 2 years to put off the more difficult decisions as to how to transition their economies away from fossil fuels. So that short-term thinking is certainly a challenge. However, we've seen over the last 2 days with the Dublin climate dialogues and looking back further since we have started mainstream, particularly over the last couple of years, we are seeing politicians getting more bolder and more ambitious, and they see votes in being more proactive on climate and energy. So, the decisions by Japan, by South Korea, by the United States, in fact, by all of the G7 to set mid-century net zero targets is a recognition that they want and we need the world to change. So aligned with that, I think we will see an acceleration in the decline in coal use, especially in the critical markets in Asia Pacific. And this is for 2 reasons. Firstly, connected to the net zero decisions taken by China, Japan and South Korea is the ending of export finance for new coal plants. And that's a critical point because this will have an immediate impact on countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam and Indonesia. And then secondly, as wind and solar power is now cheaper than new coal, investors are increasingly deterred by the risks of holding stranded assets. So the biggest challenge is no longer about other plants like coal or gas being built so much. It's now about ensuring that we build enough renewable energy and we do that at scale and that we do that fast enough. Last year was a record year for the installation of wind and solar plants, but we need to double and then treble and then quadruple this build out, and we need to do that very quickly. And we also need to recognise that much of that build still is in the United States and in China. So we need to rapidly increase the amount of new build across a much broader range of markets. And market structures are very important. Most electricity markets are still designed for the dispatch of centrally run, fossil fuel-based, often state-owned bulk generation like coal. So the new markets of this transition need to be much more decentralised and much, much more dynamic.
Mary, this is incredibly inspiring, and I think I am going to leave the last word in this interview to you.
I would say that there is great hope at this point in time. We are really seeing this year where real political leadership is stepping forward. Renewable energy is compelling. It's very much recognised as being cost competitive and an industry that can rapidly deploy at scale. We're seeing technological and leaps in innovation at a greater period than what we have in the past. So the circumstances and the framework definitely is there to make this year a critical year in terms of changing the dynamic and combating the crisis that lies ahead of us. And so my final word is that I would conclude with great hope. It really is a privilege to work in the renewable energy sector, and I say this to my colleagues, all the time in mainstream. We stand in the industry that really has the opportunity to make the biggest impact in this crisis, and we very much can do that, and we are doing that, and we look forward to doing even more of that over the coming years.